Her drunk mother traded the girl's shoes for gin and left her barefoot in the rain. I found her on a Thursday. I know it was Thursday because Thursday was the day I drove the mule cart into Cobber Wells to collect whatever feed Harlan Doss had set aside for me. And that particular Thursday he'd shorted me a half sack of barley again, and I was already sour about it on the ride back. The sky had gone the color of an old bruise around 4 o'clock, and by the time I cleared the cottonwood break that marked the south edge of my land, the rain was coming sideways off the mesa. She was sitting in the ditch alongside the road. Not huddled, sitting upright, back straight, both hands flat on her knees, like she was waiting for a stage that wasn't coming. Her hair was plastered to the side of her face, and her dress, some pale thing, yellow once maybe, was soaked through and stuck to her arms. No coat, no hat, no shoes. I pulled Cutter up and he stomped once because he didn't like the rain any better than I did. I looked at her. She looked at the road in front of her, not at me. "You hurt?" I said. She didn't answer right away. She wasn't ignoring me. She was deciding something. "No," she said finally. "Where are your shoes?" That she didn't answer at all. I sat there a moment. The rain ticked on the brim of my hat and ran off in a sheet. I looked at her feet. They were bare and they were pale, and there was a cut on the right one, just below the ankle, maybe a 1/4 inch, the kind you get from a piece of glass you don't see. The mud around her had turned dark from it. I said, "Get up in the cart." She looked at me then. Her eyes were gray or green, I couldn't tell in that light, and she had the particular look of a person who has been disappointed enough times that an offer of help reads first as a threat. "I don't know you," she said. "No," I said. "My name is Caleb Dunn. I have a holding about 2 miles up this road. You can sit in the rain if you'd rather, but that cut's going to go septic by morning." She looked at the road again. Then she stood up, which took her 2 tries because her legs had stiffened in the cold, and she climbed up over the wheel without taking my hand. She sat on the far end of the bench with about 3 feet between us and looked straight ahead. I turned Cutter back toward home. Neither of us said anything for the 2 miles. That was all right with me. Her name was Nora Fitch. I learned that before I learned anything else, because it was the first thing she told me when I set her in the chair by the stove and went to find a clean cloth for her foot. She said it the way a person says something that is possibly being used against them, flat, without decoration. "Nora Fitch," she said, "in case you need to know." "Caleb Dunn," I said again, "though I already told you that." She almost smiled. I saw the edge of it before it went away. The cut wasn't deep, but it was dirty, and I cleaned it with carbolic, and she didn't make a sound, just watched my hands work with that same level expression. Her feet were small. The left one had an old scar across the ball of it, healed white, years old. I didn't ask. I found her a pair of wool socks that had belonged to my uncle, and they were too big by half, but she put them on. I gave her a shirt of mine and turned around while she changed, and then I put the kettle on. She told me about the shoes while she drank the coffee. Not all of it, just the shape of it. Her mother, she said, had a habit, had had it as long as Nora could remember. They'd been passing through Cobber Wells for 3 days. Her mother had a man there, a freighter named Platt, who let them sleep in his tack room. The shoes were good ones, she said, leather-soled, bought off a woman in Tucson who'd outgrown them. Her mother had been drunk since Tuesday. That morning she'd taken the shoes while Nora slept and traded them to the man at the saloon for a bottle. When Nora came to find her, she was gone. So was Platt. So was anyone who might have mattered. Nora told me all of this the way you'd tell someone about weather. Matter of fact, not asking for sympathy, not performing a wound, just reporting. I listened without saying anything, which is what I do best. When she was done, she wrapped both hands around the mug and looked into it. She said, "I won't be a trouble to you. I can work." "I didn't ask you to work," I said. "I know, I'm telling you anyway." I looked at her. She was young, 22, 23 maybe, and there was something in her face that was older than that, the way a tree gets old faster in a hard place. She wasn't beautiful the way a man thinks of when he thinks beautiful. She was something else, particular. A strong jaw and steady eyes, and the set of her mouth said she'd been carrying a weight for a long time and had learned the balance of it. "All right," I said. "Tonight you sleep in the back room. Tomorrow we figure out the rest." She nodded like that was a contract. I should tell you something about that place, about what I'd made of it. The holding was 160 acres that my uncle Amos Dunn had filed on in 1879, back when a man could still do that in the territory if he was willing to stake it out and live on it, and not blink when the land told him to. He'd built the house himself, 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, adobe and timber, thick walls that held the cold out in winter and the heat out in summer. He'd dug the well. He'd planted the cottonwoods along the creek draw, 20 trees in a line, saplings when he put them in, and they were grown tall and serious by the time I came to live here. Amos died in '89. He left it to me because I was the only Dunn who'd ever come to see him more than once a year, and also because, as he put it in the letter the attorney gave me, I was the one who understood what a piece of ground was actually for. He said that, wrote it out in his careful hand. I folded the letter and kept it. I'd been a scout, U.S. Army, 18 years. I won't go into all of it. There are parts of those years that live in a room I don't open. What I'll tell you is that I was good at it, reading the land, finding water where there wasn't any, knowing which way a trail bent 2 miles before you got there. The Army used me the way it used everything that was useful, thoroughly and without sentiment. And when I was done being useful, they cut me loose with a handshake and a paper that said I'd served well, and a pension that wouldn't cover the winter feed for 2 horses. I came to the holding in the fall of 1892. I was 51 years old and I had a bad knee from a fall on shale outside of Nogales, and I was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. I knew how to work. I'd always known that, so I worked. I ran a small cattle operation, 20, sometimes 25 head, and I had the kitchen garden and the hay meadow down by the creek, and I did some freighting work in the shoulder seasons when the herd didn't need me. It wasn't much. It was mine. I didn't have a wife. I'd been close to it twice, and neither time had come to anything. One woman had waited 2 years while I was in the field, and then married a dry goods man in Albuquerque, which I couldn't fault her for. The other had been a Pima woman named Suki, who I'd have married in an eye blink, but she died of fever in the spring of '88, and I buried her on a hillside outside of Florence, and I still thought about her every January when the desert bloomed yellow. So I was alone. I'd made my peace with it, or I thought I had. Then the rain brought me Nora Fitch. She worked. I should have known from the first morning. I came out at 5:30 to find the fire already built up and coffee on and Nora at the table with the flour sack, making biscuits. She'd found the kitchen the way a competent person finds a kitchen, by looking at it with sense. She knew where things were after one survey of the room. I stood in the doorway. "You don't have to do that," I said. "I know," she said. "Sit down." I sat down. The biscuits were better than mine. I didn't say that, but she probably knew. After breakfast, I showed her the place. The well, the barn, the root cellar, the hay meadow. She walked beside me and looked at things the way I looked at things, straight at them, without comment, filing them away. When we got to the cattle pen, she leaned on the rail and looked at the herd for a long time without speaking. "You're short one," she said. "How do you know?" "The way they're bunched. There's a gap on the left side. One's either sick or gone." I looked at the herd. She was right. The roan heifer had been limping for 2 days and I'd put her in the far pen. "She's in the back," I said, "lame." Nora nodded. "What's wrong with her foot?" "Stone bruise, I think, maybe a crack." "Can I see her?" We went around back. The heifer was standing in the corner with her weight off the right rear. Nora went in without asking and ran her hand down the leg and picked the foot up and looked at it. I watched her hands. They were sure and quiet, and the heifer didn't flinch. "Stone bruise," she said. "She'll be fine. Pack it with clay and keep her off the hard ground for a week." "You've done this before," I said. "My grandfather ran cattle," she said, "back in Missouri, before things went bad." She didn't say what bad was. I didn't ask. That was the pattern of us in those early weeks. She told me things in pieces when she was ready, and I didn't pry. I've never been a man who pries. In my experience, the things a person doesn't tell you are usually things they're still working out for themselves, and asking early only makes them lock up. You wait. You give them space to come to it. She earned her way fast. She could cook, and she knew cattle, and she could mend just about anything: fence wire, harness leather, a coat seam, with a patience and neatness that I respected. She took on the hen house without being asked, and by the second week we had eggs again because she'd figured out that the hens had been getting into the far corner of the barn where there were rats, and she set 4 traps and closed the gap in the wall, and that was that. I paid her. Not much, I didn't have much, but she was working and she was owed. She took the coins without embarrassment and kept them in a small cloth pouch she carried in her skirt pocket. At night she sat by the stove and read from the 2 books I had, a Bible and a natural history of the territory. And I worked on the accounts or mended tack, or sometimes just sat and smoked and listened to the dark outside. It was not uncomfortable. That surprised me. I'd been alone so long that I'd lost the habit of company, and usually company wore on me after a day or 2. Nora didn't wear on me. She was quiet without being absent. She took up just the space she needed and no more. I thought about that sometimes, lying in my bunk after she'd gone to the back room, the particular shape of her quietness. The way she'd look up when I came in the door, not startled, just noting, like a person who'd learned to track the world around her because the world around her had not always been safe. I didn't let myself think too far down that road. She was young. She was here because she had nowhere else to be. Those were 2 facts that a man with any decency kept in front of himself. Her mother turned up on the 14th day. I was in the barn when I heard the wagon. An unfamiliar sound, not the rhythm of anyone I knew from the territory. I came out into the yard, and there was a buckboard stopped at the gate, and a woman on the seat who might have been 40 or might have been 60. It was hard to say. She had Nora's coloring, the gray-green eyes, the strong jaw, but everything that was clear in Nora was blurred in her, soft in the wrong places. The bottle had done its work over the years. She had a man with her. The freighter, I assumed. Platt. Big through the shoulders, a brown beard going gray, the look of a man who was used to getting what he wanted from people who couldn't stop him. Nora was at the clothesline. She'd heard the wagon too, and by the time I got to the gate she was standing just behind my left shoulder. I felt her there without looking. "That's my daughter," the woman said to me. No greeting. Her voice had the thick texture of someone who'd been at it since morning. "That's Nora Fitch," I said. "She works for me." "She doesn't work for you." "She's my daughter and she comes home." "Mama," Nora said quiet from behind me. The woman's eyes went to her. Something moved in them, not love exactly, but the complicated ownership that some people mistake for it. "Get your things," she said. I didn't move from the gate. I said, "She stays if she wants to stay. She goes if she wants to go. You don't decide that." Platt leaned forward on the seat. "Old man," he said, "step aside." There are moments in a man's life when something settles in him like cold iron. Not anger, something quieter than that and more permanent. I looked at Platt and I said, "Get off my land." He started to get down from the wagon. I waited until he had both feet on the ground and was coming at me, and then I hit him once, hard, at the hinge of his jaw. He went down sideways into the dirt like a sack dropped from a loft. He stayed there. The woman on the wagon made a sound. I looked at her. I said, "Take him and go, don't come back here." She looked at Nora. Nora was looking at the ground. There was something happening in Nora's face, not tears. She wasn't going to cry, something harder than that. The look of a person closing a door they've already walked through 100 times and know leads nowhere. "Nora," the woman said again, softer now. The softness of a person who's used up their leverage and knows it. "Go, Mama," Nora said. "Just go." Platt got himself up after a minute, holding his jaw, and climbed back onto the wagon without looking at me. The woman took up the reins. They turned around and went back down the road. I watched them until they were past the cottonwoods. When I turned around, Nora was still standing where she'd been. She was looking at the road too, at the dust the wagon left. I didn't say anything. I went back to the barn. She came and found me an hour later. I was working on the bridle that had cracked its headpiece. She stood in the doorway for a moment, and then she came in and sat on the hay bale opposite and watched me work. After a while she said, "I'm sorry about that." "Nothing to be sorry for," I said. "She's been like that since I was 9, Nora said. "Since my father left, she wasn't always." She said the last part like she was reminding herself of something. I kept working the leather. I said, "My sergeant in the field, 40 years of service, used to say the hardest thing was knowing the difference between a person who couldn't be helped and a person who wouldn't be helped. Said once you worked that out, a lot of things got easier." Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Which was your mother?" I thought about it. "Neither," I said. "She was just unlucky, different thing entirely." She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh but was related to one. It was the first time I'd heard anything like that from her. I finished with the headpiece, and she stayed until I was done. August came in dry and mean. The creek dropped to a foot deep, and then 8 inches, and then I was hauling water for the garden from the well. 3 of my neighbors lost cattle to heat, and 2 to a group of men who came through the east end of the territory cutting fences and taking what they found on the other side. Sheriff out of Cobber Wells rode out twice, and both times went home empty. The third time I saw him ride past my gate, he had the look of a man who decided the problem was bigger than his jurisdiction. I told Nora about the Finscutters. It wasn't to frighten her, it was practical, the same way I'd have told a hand. She needed to know not to ride the east pasture alone, not to answer the door if she didn't recognize the wagon. She listened, asked 2 questions, nodded. "Do you have a gun I can use?" she said. I gave her the short rifle, a .44 440 carbine. I took her out back and had her shoot at a fence post from 50 feet. She shot twice, both on target. I moved her back to 100 feet. She shot twice more, both hit. "You've done this before too," I said. "My grandfather taught me," she said. "Said a woman alone ought to know." I watched her reload without needing to be told how. I had a feeling about Nora sometimes, a sense of things that had been put in her early and had stayed, solid and ready, under everything that had come after, like posts under snow. You couldn't always see them, but the fence didn't move. We got through August. September came and cooled things down. The creek came back up. I got most of my hay in, and Nora helped with the cutting and the stacking, and she worked without complaint from first light until the light went. She was strong for her size. Not a large woman, but the kind of strong that doesn't make a performance of itself. I should tell you what I noticed. I noticed things I had no particular right to notice. The way she sat on the fence rail in the evening and watched the light go off the mesa. The particular set of her shoulders when she'd made up her mind about something. The way she'd find me when I was out working and bring coffee without saying anything about it. Just set it down near my hand and go back to whatever she'd been doing. I was careful. That's the only word for it. I was careful the way you're careful around something that matters. I was 52 years old. She was 22, 23. I told myself those numbers enough times that they'd worn smooth from handling. A man knows what he is. He knows what he isn't. I told myself, she's here because she's building a stake. She'll have enough put by spring, and she'll go to Tucson or maybe Santa Fe and start herself over someplace that isn't Cobber Wells and isn't her mother's damage. That's what's ahead of her. That's right and proper. I believed it. I just noticed things anyway. October. The fence gutters came to my land on a Tuesday night. I heard them at about 2 in the morning. Not the wire, I'd hear that later, but the horses. The particular sound of horses being ridden slow and quiet across caliche ground. I was out of my bunk and had my boots on before I was fully awake. The old training. It never entirely leaves you. I got to the window. Moonlight clear. 3 men on the far side of the east pasture, maybe 400 yards out. I could see the wire had already come down. 2 of my steers had gotten through the gap and were standing in the open, confused, and one of the men was easing toward them. I got my rifle. The back door opened behind me and Nora was there with the carbine, already loaded, a coat pulled over her nightclothes. She didn't ask what was happening. She looked where I was looking and saw the same thing I saw. "I'll take the left," she said. I looked at her. "Go," she said. I went out the front. She went around through the kitchen. I came out of the cottonwoods on the far north side with enough moonlight to work with, and I put a round into the dirt about 10 feet in front of the lead man's horse. The horse reared, and the man had his hands full for about 5 seconds, and that was when Nora put a round off the fence post closest to the second man, close enough to make a point without drawing blood. The third man had already turned his horse. They left the way they'd come, fast. I fixed the fence in the dark. It took about an hour. Nora held the lantern and handed me pliers and wire when I needed them and didn't talk except to say, "There," once when I'd gotten a strand pulled tight enough. We got the steers back in through the gate and I latched it. When we got back to the house, I lit the kitchen lamp and put coffee on. We sat at the table. Neither of us said anything for a while. There was still the particular high wire feeling in my hands that comes after trouble, the one that takes a few minutes to settle. Nora had the carbine on the table in front of her. She'd wiped the action without being told to. I looked at her across the table. She was looking at the lamp. There was a line of something along her jaw, soot or dust from the dark, and her hair had come half loose and she hadn't fixed it yet. I said, "Thank you." She looked at me. "You don't have to thank me for that," she said. "Yes, I do." She didn't argue. I poured the coffee and we sat there until the feeling in my hands went away, and the dark outside got the pale edge that comes before dawn. I'll tell you about the day I understood what had happened. It was a Saturday in November. I'd ridden into Cobber Wells for the mail and some flour, and I stopped at the hardware to see about a new gate hinge. Ed Burrell runs the hardware, has since before I came to the territory. He's a broad man with a red face and the particular dry way of talking that comes from spending 30 years watching other people's troubles. He slid the hinge across the counter, and then he leaned on it the way he does and said, "Here you got trouble out your way last month. Fence gutters." "Had it, handled it," I said. "That right. Heard you had help." I was getting out my coin. "I did," I said. "That the girl," he said, "the Fitch girl." "She works for me," I said. Ed was quiet a moment, fitting things together in his way. Then he said, "Caleb, you know I've known you about 10 years. "About that," I said. "You're a hard man to compliment," he said, "so I'll just say it plain. What you did taking that girl in, giving her something real to stand on, there's not 10 men in this territory would have done it, especially knowing about the mother." He paused. "She doing all right?" "She's doing fine," I said. He nodded. "Good," he said, "good." I took my hinge and my flour, and I rode home. I thought about what Ed said for the whole 2 miles. Not the compliment part. I've never put much stock in being complimented. I thought about the other part, taking that girl in, giving her something real. I got home at about 4 and put Cutter up and went to find Nora to tell her the flour was in. She was in the vegetable garden pulling the last of the parsnips before the hard freeze came. She had dirt on her hands up to the wrist, and she looked up when she heard me and said, "Mail." "Nothing much. Letter from the land office about the west boundary. I'll deal with it." She went back to the parsnips. I started to go back to the barn, and then I stopped. I stood there for a moment with the particular awkwardness of a man who has talked himself into something and hasn't quite worked out how to say it. "Nora," I said. She looked up. "I want you to know," I said, "that if you want to stay past spring, I mean you're welcome. What you've put in here, the work you've done, you've earned a permanent place, if that's what you want." She looked at me for a moment. I couldn't read her face, which I'd gotten better at over the months. Then she said, "Is that the only reason you're asking?" I said, "What?" "The work," she said. "Is that the only reason?" I was quiet a long time. A crow went over the garden low, and its shadow crossed the dirt between us. "No," I said, "it's not the only reason." She looked at the parsnips in her hand. She turned at once, looking at it. Then she set it in the basket and stood up, and she walked to where I was standing, and she put both her hands, still dirty, flat on my chest and looked up at me. Her eyes were green. I'd finally settled that. Green with something gray in it, like the territory itself. She said, "I've been waiting for you to say something honest." I said, "I'm not easy. I'm old by your measure. I've got a bad knee and a tendency to go quiet for days when something's bothering me, and this land is hard, you've seen it." "I know what I've seen," she said. "I'm telling you anyway." "I know," she said. "That's one of the things I like about you." I put my hand on the back of her head, carefully, the way you'd handle something you couldn't afford to break. She leaned into it just slightly. Just the small give of it, the weight. We stood like that in the garden in the last light, with the frost coming on, and the parsnips still half in the ground. There was something she said to me that first winter that I've carried ever since. We were in the kitchen. It was the kind of January night when the wind gets into the adobe walls and you can hear it looking for a way through. I'd banked the stove up high, and we were sitting at the table, and Nora had been quiet for a while, the particular quiet of someone working something out. She said, "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead," I said. "Why did you stop that first day? There are men who would have driven past." "I thought about it," I said. "I've spent a long time looking at things other people ride past. Ground, trail, sign, weather coming. You learn to look at things." I paused. "You had the back straight, even in the ditch in the rain. I've seen a lot of people who were done. You weren't done." She looked at her coffee. "I almost was," she said. "I know," I said. "Almost doesn't count." She was quiet again. Then she said, "My mother, what she did, it wasn't the shoes, not really. It was the last thing, the last in a long list of things. I sat in that ditch and I thought, there's nobody. There's not one person in the world who would stop." She paused. "And then you stopped." I didn't say anything. "I want you to know that," she said. "I want you to know what that meant, not just practical things, what it meant." I looked at her. She was looking straight at me, the way she looked at things she meant. I said, "I know what it's like to be used up and put down and told you're finished. I know that particular kind of alone." She nodded slowly. "The army," she said. "Not just the army," I said. "Just a life, you know, things accumulate." "They do," she said. The wind found a corner of the roof and pushed against it, and the lamp flickered once. "I want you to know something too," I said. What we have here, it's more than I thought I'd have, more than I'd counted on. I want you to know I don't take it for nothing." She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Just that, left it there. We stayed like that while the wind pushed against the house, and the lamp steadied, and the stove ticked with the heat. Spring came. I want to tell you about spring on that land, because it was different from what I'd known before. Or maybe I was different. Maybe what changes is what you're looking at it through. The cottonwoods came in, green at first and then the full-leaf green of June. The creek ran clear and fast from the snowmelt, and you could hear it from the kitchen in the mornings. The meadow went pale yellow with the first growth and then deep green as it came in, and I'd walk it in the early morning before breakfast while the dew was still heavy, just to feel the ground under my boots and smell the wet grass. Nora had started a proper kitchen garden, bigger than the one I'd kept. She'd laid it out in the fall, planned it on paper actually, drew it in squares with the crops noted in her careful hand, and come April she was out there before me every morning with a trowel and a bucket. She grew things I hadn't bothered with. Herbs, 3 kinds of squash, pole beans she strung on a frame she built herself from willow branches. The holding looked different, I noticed that. It had always been functional, now it was something more. I couldn't have said what exactly, something about care. The evidence of a person caring about a place that shows up in small accumulated ways. A new hinge on the root cellar, the henhouse rebuilt level, the fence line along the east pasture retrimmed for the first time in years. My neighbor Aldous Crane rode out in April to look at a bull I was selling. He was a man I'd known for 5 years, straight-backed, not given to compliment. He walked around the bull and he walked around the holding, and he looked at the garden, and the new woodpile and the cottonwoods with the whitewash on the lower trunks that Nora had put on against the bark beetles. He said, "Caleb, place looks half again better than last time I saw it." "Good year," I said. He looked at me. He wasn't a man who said much, but when he said something he meant it. "That the girl," he said, nodding toward the house where Nora had gone for coffee. "That's Nora," I said. "She's been here about 6 months." He nodded slowly. "Man needs a partner in a place like this," he said. "You found a good one." He said it plain, like a fact about weather, no edge to it. I said, "I know it." He bought the bull. Summer again, the second one. The fence gutters never came back. I heard later they'd moved north, gotten caught up in something in Colorado, and 2 of them had been jailed. I didn't think much about it. What I thought about was the work. What I think about still. There is a particular satisfaction in hard work done on your own ground with a person beside you who knows what they're doing and doesn't need to be told the same thing twice. You don't have to explain the whole of yourself. You just work, and the work is the conversation. And at the end of the day, you're both tired in the clean way that comes from having done something real. Nora and I were in the hay meadow in July, the second cutting. I was on the scythe and she was raking behind me, and it was the kind of afternoon that builds toward a thunderstorm, the sky going copper to the west, the air going still in that waiting way. We both knew the weather was coming. We worked without talking, faster as it got closer. We got the hay in just about 10 minutes before the first big drops hit the barn roof. I pulled the door shut behind us, and we stood there in the half-dark of the barn and listened to the rain come down hard outside. The cattle were in the far end, moving a little, restless from the thunder. I was still breathing hard from the last sprint. So was she. She was leaning back against the side of the hay bay with her arms crossed and her hair coming down from where she'd had it pinned, and she was looking at the barn ceiling listening to the rain. She said without looking at me, "We almost made it." "We made it," I said. She looked at me then, "Barely." "Barely counts," I said. She shook her head a little, but she was almost smiling. Not quite. That edge of it that I'd learned to read over the months, the place just before the smile where the thing she meant was already there, already visible, just not quite wearing its full face yet. I said, "You know what Aldous Crane said to me in the spring?" "What?" "Said the place looked half again better than last year." I paused. "It does." She looked at the hay we'd stacked. She said it needed work. "It needed more than work," I said. "It needed somebody who gave a damn about it." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the rain came down harder, drumming on the roof. A flash of lightning somewhere south. Thunder 2 seconds behind it. She said, "I give a damn about more than the land." I looked at her. She was still looking at the hay, but her jaw had the particular set that meant she'd said a thing and was now letting it sit, giving me time with it. I said, I know that. She looked at me, do you? Yes. The thunder rolled through, long and rolling. When it faded, she said, sometimes I think you don't believe it. I thought about that, the truth of it. It's not that I don't believe it, I said. It's, I've been a man who was used and then put down, twice in different ways. When a thing is good, I wait to see if it ends. She pushed herself off the hay and walked to where I was standing. She looked up at me, not far, she wasn't small, and she put her hand flat on my chest. The same as the garden. The same gesture, learned apparently. She said, it's not going to end. You understand me. I'm not going to use you up and leave. I'm not going anywhere. I said, Nora. I know what I'm saying, she said. I'm not young and stupid, and I'm not saying it because I'm grateful. I'm saying it because I mean it and I want you to hear it. She paused. You stopped for me. You fixed my foot. You hit a man who had it coming, and you gave me a place to be, and you never once, not one time, made me feel like a burden. I put my hand on hers, where it was on my chest. That's not a small thing, she said. Most men can't do it. You did it without even thinking about it, just because it was right. She pressed her hand harder against my chest. I see who you are, she said. I see it clear, and I'm not going anywhere. The rain was still coming down hard. The cattle moved and settled. I looked at her for a long moment, her eyes green and steady and certain. I said, all right. It was a thin thing to say for what I felt. But she understood it, because she moved a little closer and leaned her forehead against my jaw, and I put my arm around her, and we stood like that in the barn while the storm worked its way east. We married in October, at the end of the second fall. It was a small thing. The circuit preacher came through, Harmon Blunt, a steady-handed man from Kentucky who'd been doing the rounds in the territory for 15 years. Nora's dress was the blue calico she'd bought in Cobber Wells in the spring, and she'd put a sprig of dried chamomile from the garden in her hair, just one, small and pale. She stood beside me on the porch in the morning light and said what she meant to say in a clear voice, and I said what I meant to say, and it was done. Aldous Crane was there. Ed Burrell from the hardware. A woman Nora had befriended in the summer, a widow named Agnes who ran the millinery on the main street of Cobber Wells. About 8 people total. After, Agnes said to me, in the quiet way of a person who wasn't trying to make much of it, she's a good woman, Caleb. I know she is, I said. She talks about you, Agnes said. When she comes into town, not a lot, you understand, but when she does, she paused. The way she talks about you, a woman doesn't talk that way about a man she isn't sure of. I looked across the yard to where Nora was talking to Crane, her head up, the calico bright in the October sun. She had the look she got when she was interested in something, leaning in slightly, asking a question I couldn't hear. Crane was answering, and she was listening with her full attention, the way she did with things that mattered. Agnes said, "You're a lucky man." "Yes," I said, "I know. Here's what I want to tell you. Here's what I keep coming back to. I spent 18 years being good at something and being used for it, and then one day I wasn't useful anymore, and that was that. I've thought about that for a long time, turned it over. And the thing I've worked out is this: the Army used what I knew how to do. That's all. Not who I was. Not what I was worth. Nora sees the whole thing. I don't know how to say it better than that. She sees what I'm good at and she respects it, the land reading, the steadiness, the knowing what to do when trouble comes, and she also sees the rest of it. The part that goes quiet when something's bothering me. The bad knee on cold mornings. The way I still sometimes wake up at 2 in the morning and lie there looking at the ceiling for reasons that have nothing to do with anything in the present. She sees all of that and she stays. And she stays not out of pity or gratitude or having no other choice but out of what she said in the barn. Seeing clear. Being seen clear by a good person. That's the thing a man doesn't know he's been hungry for until he gets it. Most mornings now I'm up first. I get the fire going and put the kettle on, and after a while I'll hear her in the back room, the particular creak of the floorboard she always hits near the door, and she'll come out and her hair will be loose and she'll look at the lamp and then at me and she'll say something ordinary like, "Fence line need checking today," or, "I want to move the bean rows come spring." Something practical, something about the work and the land and what needs doing. And I'll say whatever I say back. And that'll be the morning. Outside the cottonwoods are grown in full. The 20 trees my uncle planted as saplings, and they're serious trees now, big enough to shade the full length of the kitchen garden in the afternoon. In the evening I sit on the porch steps sometimes, and watch the light go off the mesa and listen to the creek and the cottonwoods and whatever wind is moving in from the west. Nora sits beside me. Not always. Sometimes she's still working or reading or doing something in the house. But sometimes she comes out and sits down beside me on the steps, and she doesn't say anything and neither do I. We just sit there in the fading light with the land out in front of us, our land, what we've made of it together, and the smell of the chamomile she grows along the south wall of the house. That's where we are, that's the whole thing. I'm 63 years old and I have a bad knee and a holding that's better than it's ever been, and a woman who chose me with her eyes open, knowing what she was choosing and stayed. Some mornings I sit for a minute before I get up and I think about that particular road in the rain, the ditch, the straight back, the bare feet, how close I came to driving past. I don't think about it for long. There's work to do. There always is. But I think about it enough to remember that nothing good in my life was the result of holding back. Every good thing came from stopping when I should have stopped, or standing when I should have stood, or saying a plain thing plainly when it needed saying. The rest was just the work. And the work was everything.